career. From Cairo back to Washington, where I was a special assistant to the Deputy Secretary of State, and that's where I honed my communication skills. To be a great diplomat, you need to be able to communicate. I spoke earlier about being able to advocate for yourself, but also to distill information in a crisp, clear fashion, which means not academic writing, not, I used to get assignments. Okay, you might want to put your fingers in your ears again. They tell us we have a paper to write and it needs to be 4,000 words or 10,000 words, and you're typing and I'm counting words and trying to put some more words in there to stretch it out to the length it has to be. And government writing is like journalistic writing. You got to get to the point. People are so overburdened. When I was in that job at the time, it seemed like a lot, and I've had more because when I was at the White House, I had more, but I got 200 cables with messages a day, 200, not just, hi, how you doing? Do you want to meet for lunch? But messages from the field with information that they thought the deputy secretary needed to know. And my job, because he for sure was not going to read all of those, was to read all of those cables. And sometimes they were 2 pages, 4 pages, 6 pages long. And I had to distill all the information on one piece of paper, and not 9 by 11, ladies and gentlemen, 5 by 7 with an inch margin. So tight. This is what the main point is of this cable. This is the background that informs the main point. And this is what they're asking you to do or asking you to decide. And this is my recommendation. And then 3 little lines underneath: agree, disagree, discuss. And I put my note on top of the cable and into the Deputy Secretary's office. He'd look at my note. He might read the cable, he might not. And he would send it back out and it would be agree with my recommendation. And I go, yay, got it. Or disagree, and he'd have a note about what he wanted to do, or discuss. And then that meant I needed to go in and talk to him, give him some more information, some additional background, or he might want me to talk to somebody on his behalf. But that ability to distill it all tight has served me so very well in everything I do, because now I've been 3 years out of the diplomatic corps, and it's still a skill that helps me to be able to send a note to somebody. Quick question, boom, boom, boom. These are the 3 things you need to know. This is what I want you to do, yes or no. So think about that, work on your writing skills, tight, clear, concise. So I did that job for 2 years. And in fact, he became Secretary of State and kept all of us. So that's how I became special assistant to the Secretary of State. And I was in charge of Africa and the Middle East as my 2 regions, and political military affairs and international organizations. So any of you who have an interest in working for the United Nations or the Food and Agriculture Organization or International Organization of Migration, any of those organizations, I can talk to you about that as well. And that's being an international civil servant, which I always thought had a cool ring to it. But while I was in that job, I noticed that originally I wanted to be the internal officer in Paris. I wanted to go to Paris. I wanted to learn French. I thought I needed another world language besides Arabic that would get me to cooler places, or at least out of war zones. And I was geared, and of course he was Secretary of State. And so if he stood up for me and said, I'd like her, this is my kitty Mayhem, who is Mayhem the Zoom cat. He would support me for it, and I had a great chance of getting the job. But then I thought, oh, look at all these cables that are coming in from the Gaza Strip. I think I want to go to Israel and do Gaza, because I'm interested in making my career and moving forward. I've had this great job as a special assistant, but I see the front burner issue is the Middle East peace process. So I tried to get that job. Originally, I was told they promised it to somebody else. This goes back to my advocate for yourself, because the Deputy Assistant Secretary, who later became our ambassador to Israel, Dan Kurtzer, great guy, I called him back and I said, Dan, I understand that you're going to give the job to Phil. He is a great guy, but I think you're making a mistake. I think I'd be better at it My language is really strong. I have great interpersonal skills. You've seen me at work. You've seen what I've done in this job. So even though you've already promised it to him, I want you to keep me in mind next time or for another job in the Bureau. And I hung up the phone, and that was that. And he called me back 2 weeks later and he said, Gina, are you still interested? And I said, yes, thinking, but you're giving it to what's his face, who was my friend too. And he said, we're going to send him to Jerusalem instead. You're going to get the Gaza job. And so my willingness, don't ever, ever hesitate to tell people why you are the one. If I hadn't, if I just said, oh, you're giving it to him, okay, thanks, sorry, but I said, this is why. This is why you should give it to me if you have that opportunity. And it was an amazing assignment, as you can imagine. So 3 years covering the Gaza Strip, driving from Tel Aviv to Gaza every day, crossing a border from Israel into the Gaza Strip. I was supposed to be there before Yasser Arafat returned. I could not, unfortunately. I used to be a very keen squash player, which is a very good game around the world. Lots of people play it, far more than racquetball. So I learned how to play squash in Baghdad. I played it in Indonesia. An Austrian diplomat gave me lessons in Indonesia. I played it in Egypt at the Gezira Club, meeting contacts there. I don't do golf, but squash was great. But I tore my ACL in Tunis, brushing up on Arabic, getting ready to go to the Gaza Strip. And I had to go to London for surgery, and it took time, I'm sorry to say. So I missed being there for Arafat, but got there soon after. And then going into the Gaza Strip, 3 to 4 times a week, meeting with Yasser Arafat many, many times, and working to understand Israeli and Palestinian views on the peace process. And it was a great job because my cables went right up to the secretary, as I knew that they would from my experience before. I was honing my drafting skills, and while I was there, I got asked to do, if I was interested in becoming the deputy spokesperson of the Department of State. And I said, yes, absolutely, I would love that job. I thought that was a perfect job for me. I like to talk, as you can tell. Well, we can talk about that during the Q&A period, because you'll notice on my resume, it does not say I was deputy spokesperson of the Department of State. And that was a hard lesson I learned, ladies and gentlemen. Know your system. Know who the deciders are. Because I thought, because the assistant secretary and spokesperson asked me if I wanted that job, that I had that job in the basket. Because my system didn't work like that. But I didn't know it. And I made some mistakes, and I didn't get the job. I was very sad about that, because again, I thought I'd love that job. But in fact, it left me kind of dangling. And that's when I ended up going to work as a Pearson Fellow, a program that the State Department has to send you outside of the State Department. State Department pays your salary, but you can go work for another agency, you can go work for a state government, a local government, or the private sector, because the State Department wants you connected to the US. And so I ended up not wanting to, but working for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The ranking member was Joe Biden, which turned out to be a good thing. Turned out to be a very helpful thing when I was up for an ambassadorship later on, as you can imagine. It's also not a bad thing right now. So worked for him, hated it. And we can talk about working on the Hill, which is a very interesting thing and people love. Not for me. Really couldn't get out of there fast enough, and had the good luck. While I was working in the Gaza Strip, we had a lot of congressional visitors, congressmen, senators coming and their staff. And one of the staffers for the House Foreign Affairs Committee got to know me. She came multiple times. We argued most of the time because we didn't agree on the policies in the Middle East, but she remembered me, and she got asked to come to the White House as the senior director in charge of legislative affairs. And she asked me to come work for her as a director for legislative affairs. And so that's how I got that job. And again, it goes back to earlier saying, if you are enjoying what you're doing, people are going to notice, you're going to shine. And so because I was such a spirited what we call control officer. I set up their appointments, made sure they had the transportation. I was note taker in all their meetings as they went around the Gaza Strip and met with Israelis. So I got to spend time with them. That's how I got that job offer. So even if you hate the job, do your best. It will stand you in great stead. That's how I got to the White House. I stayed there for 2 years, first doing legislative affairs and then doing the Arabian Peninsula when I was in charge of the GCC countries and Yemen, which of course led me to Saudi SCG. Again, know your system, because I had bid on the Saudi job. I need to go back. Sorry, I need to pause because I skipped the beauty pageant, Egypt. While I was working as the labor officer, that's why they sent me to Helwan, that factory that was having a labor dispute and a demonstration, I got to know a union person who had contacts with Fred Lebeau. Are any of you runners? Anybody do marathons? If you do, you may know the name Fred Lebeau because he started the Boston Marathon. And he was invited into Egypt to start the Cairo Marathon. And he came with a woman who at the same time as they were organizing the Cairo Marathon, put in place the first beauty pageant for the Miss Universe contest in Egypt. And I was like, what is this? Let me go find out about these people. And I was asking Egyptians how they felt about a beauty pageant coming. And, you know, was this an exploitation of women? Were modesty requirements for Egyptian women? Would it allow them to participate in such a thing? So I got to know her and I asked her, you know, where are you getting these contestants from? What do their parents think, or their village, blah, 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 blah. And chatting with her. And she said, well, you know, actually, I need some help on this. I would like you to become director of contestants. And I thought, oh my God, what a hoot. So I had to go back to the embassy, and they went back to Washington to check with the lawyers. Got to make sure you're not breaking any laws and no ethical issues. And the lawyer said, as long as it was in my private time and I wasn't getting paid for it, that I could do it as a volunteer work. And so I was the director of contestants for the first Miss Egypt beauty contest. And I helped them walk and was one of the judges for the bathing suit contest, because they wouldn't let men do it. It was only women judges. And I announced the contestants for the evening gown portion of the beauty pageant. And so I got to do that. As you can imagine, it was a great cable back to Washington to share this slice of life of Egyptian society. And the girls that participated, they weren't all from upper class families by any means, but it was an opportunity, in fact, to get out of poverty. So it was a range of young women that participated with varying levels of English. Some of them didn't have any at all. It wasn't a requirement to participate. Again, it was great for my Arabic because I had to use it. And they chose the right one. She was a very lovely young lady, and they chose one for Miss World and one for Miss Universe. So that's the beauty. That's the beauty pageant, part of my beauty pageant, bombs and ballots. The bombs, of course, were the Scud missiles that fell in Baghdad. So that's the second part. And the ballots also either were for Egypt and for the Gaza Strip, because I was there for the first election of a president for Palestinians, the first election. And the European Union sent monitors. Jimmy Carter, the Carters sent. I met Jimmy Carter on the road between polling stations. It was very exciting to meet a former president. He was monitoring elections. And I put together a team from the embassy as well. And I had the ability, I wrote out all the questions that embassy people should be asking voters as they came out, you know, for the polling information. I identified which polling stations would be covered. I set up the teams. I wanted men and women together to make sure nobody was alone. I set the shifts, you know, for how long people would stay at the polling station, because you can imagine it was very exciting. The very first election Palestinians were having. So everybody at the embassy was volunteering, and the Gaza Strip was only allowed people were only allowed to go if they had business in the Gaza Strip, which meant very few Americans ever saw inside. So this was an opportunity. And oversaw the whole thing, ended up having lunch with Yasser Arafat while he was waiting for the results. And there was only two contestants, a woman and Yasser Arafat were the two contestants for president. And it was an amazing day, as you can imagine. The people were so excited about this election that this was the first important step on their way to becoming a full state. The title of my cable was Shiny Happy People, which was a big song that year. So it fit because there was nothing but joy among Palestinians, and a real privilege to witness as an American diplomat, to witness, not to be involved in, but to witness and report back on. I also observed an election while I was in Egypt, but I also voted in that election. And I voted in that election illegally, as you can imagine, not being Egyptian, because my cable was about the free and fair conduct of that election and whether people could trust in the sanctity of the vote and the sanctity of the ballot. And I actually, I guess I should have pulled it back at the last moment, in all honesty, but it made no difference whatsoever because I voted for the opposition and those ballots were thrown out. So mine didn't count. But what I was able to report to Washington based on that experience was that, no, those ballots were not secure. That, yes, I did see boxes of them sitting behind a building, uncounted, etc. And that's something that we look at around the world. And as you can imagine, the world will be sending election observers here in November, as they do every 4 years to report on our election. So what we do around the world, other countries do for us as well. That got me to Israel and to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which got me to the White House, which got me to to Saudi. And the reason I say know your system again for Saudi is that I bid on, in the State Department, every time you are changing position, you are allowed to, it's called a bid list. They'll send you a list of hundreds of positions at your rank and in your specialty. And you are required to put down at least 7 different assignments overseas and at home. And you have to rank them high, medium, low, but you can put up to 15. And I thought after being at the White House, I was interested in going to Jeddah because it was a consulate, it was a good size, but it was kind of sleepy. You know, it was a commercial district, it wasn't the capital, but it would allow me to run a mission. I thought, oh, it's quiet. You know, I can make whatever mistakes I'm going to make as I learn how to manage people really well. Nobody will notice too much. And then I'll be ready to, you know, put my name down for an ambassadorship. Well, as you know, I bid on that assignment in 2000, 9/11 happened. And I didn't know that if you bid on a country and you are not permanently assigned, that bid remains live. So I did a series of temporary positions in between. I was at the United Nations. I went over to DOD for a year, what we call Y tours or details. They send you someplace else, but State Department pays for you. And unbeknownst to me, that Saudi bid just kept clicking over. And so when they called me up and said, congratulations, you're going to Saudi Arabia, I said, I didn't bid on Saudi Arabia. Why are you sending me to Saudi Arabia? Because I'm thinking about the bid list I put in for that time period, which did not have Saudi on it. And they said, oh, it just, from 2000, it clicked over to 2001 and 2002. And they said, we won't make you go, but you should think about it. And thinking about it, I thought, I better go because if I don't, they'll be mad at me and they won't give me a good assignment when I want one. So I ended up in Saudi Arabia after 9/11, where one of the first things people said to me when I arrived was, were you sent to punish us? Is that why they sent a woman? You always have to have belief in yourself. And I said, no, we send you our best. It happens to be me. Congratulations to you. But I had an impact. There were women, Saudi women, who were delighted to see me because I was a symbol. It was a delicate balance, not one I was always successful at, of being an American and inhabiting what we stand for, both with regard to civil participation, human rights, women's rights, the freedom of this, that, and the other, and being respectful of local culture and local mores. So I will say to you, and I've said to many of my women staffers who've worked for me before and after my time in Saudi Arabia, yes, you can wear exactly what you want because you are an American diplomat. No one's going to tell you to wear a longer skirt or cover your arms or cover your décolletage, whatever. No one's going to tell you. But let me ask you what it is you're trying to accomplish. And if you are trying to make a connection with someone, to make sure that they hear you and are willing to speak with you, then you may need to modify how you present yourself. And I'm not saying change who you are, but wearing a long sleeve jacket in Saudi Arabia, wearing a skirt that came at least to the middle, below your calves, was going to be important for the women at my post in order to be able to do their jobs successfully. I saw that actually when I was in the Gaza Strip, and I tell the story, and she's kind of famous. You can see her on the Sunday talk show, so I will not mention her name because you'll know who I'm talking about. But she did have very nice legs, I will say, and she wore miniskirts. And she came to the Gaza Strip because she was working on the Hill at the time in her miniskirt, and she was going to Jabalia refugee camp just to see, because we knew that it was there and we were giving money to support Palestinian refugees. And the entire tour, she was completely stressed out because as she was walking in the camp, little kids, boys and girls, were running up to her and touching her legs and thighs because they didn't see that. And she was, just, why are you touching me? And pushing the kids away. And they were screaming and laughing and pointing and touching and running away. And it was a disaster. And so she wore her skirt because she could, but to what end? She didn't see what she needed to see. She wasn't able to have the conversation she was able to have a conversation with. And I saw that and said, okay, let's do what we need to do. It doesn't mean you have to cover your hair, because as a U.S. diplomat, you in fact are prohibited from covering your hair if you are not Muslim. If you are not Muslim. We weren't supposed to wear an abaya, we weren't supposed to cover our hair, but it did require that we dress modestly, which meant I had to spend money on clothes because I dressed like an American and they weren't long and they weren't all with long sleeves. The terrorist attack happened, obviously not because of anything I personally did, although I do know that some of the things I did raised anger against me personally and against the consulate. And one of the things was being involved when the government announced that there would be elections for the first time, municipal elections in Saudi Arabia. I had too prominent a position as there was a public discussion. And if I knew then what I know now, I would have been meeting with people privately, not publicly. Nonetheless, on websites, they were talking about capturing me and chopping my head off and who does she think she is and blah, 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 blah. So I had bodyguards, as you can imagine. And they attacked the consulate, and 5 of my colleagues were killed, 5 of my staff, and 10 wounded. And it was the worst day of my life, as you can imagine. Made worse the next day when I had to go to those 5 families and tell them that their husband or their son or their father had been killed in service to the U.S. Embassy. It can be a dangerous business, and nobody can tell you otherwise. It can be a dangerous business. My mom, when I was going to Saudi Arabia, all of her friends were saying, how can you let your daughter go there? That's where those 9/11 terrorists came from. Won't they kill her? It's dangerous. My mom was like, are you sure you want to go there? Sure. And at the same time that I was preparing to go to Saudi Arabia in 2002, you all may be too young to remember, in Washington, there was, I can't even remember the Beltway, something, I can't even remember what they called him, but there was it turned out a man and a young boy, 17, going around in a white No, it wasn't. They thought it was a white van. It wasn't a white van. It was a car, but they had put the boy in the trunk with his gun pointing out, and they were killing people in Virginia and Maryland, mostly in Virginia, at gas stations, petrol stations, shooting people dead as they pump gas. And they killed one person in Maryland, and they killed one person in the District of Columbia, and everybody else was killed in Virginia. The person who was killed in the District of Columbia was an older gentleman waiting at a bus stop 2 blocks from my front door. And in fact, when I took the bus into the office, that's where I waited for the bus, where that man was killed. He was the only person killed in the District of Columbia. And the person killed in Maryland was someone who was cutting their grass on his sit-down mower. And they drove by and shot him in the head. So when I got to Saudi, I had Saudi parents coming up to me saying, you know, my child is in school at George Washington University or Georgetown University or Howard University. Are they safe? Should I have them come home? So I've got Americans saying to me, how can you go to that place? It's so dangerous. And then I have Saudi parents coming to me saying, should I send my child to that place? It's so dangerous. And my philosophy has long been, but certainly that guy on the lawnmower in Maryland, really, he stuck with me still. And it's a reminder that we all have to live our lives as best as we can. Don't take foolish chances, but you cannot stay home. You cannot hide. And in Islam, where things are, in many religions, where things are ordained to a certain amount, that guy just got up to cut his grass that day. That's all he was going to do, maybe catch the game in the afternoon. He got up to cut his grass, and he did not live out the day. So can you die on a plane? Can you die in a terrorist accident? Can you die in a car accident or whatever? Live your lives. And so people say, how can you do this? Live your life. Everybody's going to die at some point. So that's how I think about it. But it was a tough day. It was a tough day. Came back, taught at the Diplomatic Institute for a year, trained diplomats going to the Middle East. I was the director for the Egypt and the Levant office, and that's when I oversaw that evacuation of American citizens, which really helped my reputation. President Bush thanked me personally for my work, along with Secretary Rice. But the attack in Jeddah hurt my reputation because the building assumed I was weak in the precautions, in the safeguards that I put up for my people in Jeddah. It was not true, but that was the rap that I was carrying. And so in order to retrieve my reputation, I had to figure out what could I do? When I came out of Saudi, I had been offered an ambassadorship. It was pulled. And I could not get a job. I was dead woman walking at one point. Nobody wanted to talk to me. Everybody knew I just had a terrible reputation. I thought at the time I might have to leave the State Department because I couldn't get a job. And a mentor at the time gave me the best advice for that time. And she said to me, Gina, sit still. Do your job, do it as well as you can, wait, because these people won't be here forever. And that is the joy of the diplomatic service when you're rotating every 2 or 3 years. If you hate your boss or you hate your colleagues, or you're only going to be around 1 or 2 years, and then you're going to a different country and they're going to a different country. So you can always wait people out. But I also knew I had to retrieve my reputation. And so I fought to get a job in the Counterterrorism Bureau. And I hunted down the ambassador at large who was in charge of it. And if you ever meet him, he might say, oh, the stalker. He might call me the stalker because I stalked him, because I needed that job. And he kept telling me to take a different job. And I kept saying, I hear you, but I really want to come and work for you. And I will tell you something, again, for your career. If you get the opportunity where somebody says, I want you to come work for me, you do it. Because anytime anybody wants you, is recruiting you to come work for them, they are invested in your success. They're going to do what it takes to help you be successful in that job, because they don't want to look bad if they came to get you. If somebody says to you, at a point in your career. I want to work for you. You should take them, because again, they are invested in doing very well in that job and making you look good as a boss. And I did that for him. He was very glad he finally gave in and told me to come work for him. And so I did counterterrorism for 4 years. And I also did, part of that was running a $300 million budget, which looks great on my resume now, and expanding our partners around the world, setting up border security, focusing on cybersecurity, which is what led me to Cyber Command as a foreign policy advisor later on in my career when I finished up being an ambassador. And once I got a great reputation as a senior official in the Counterterrorism Bureau, then I went back to State Department's leadership and said, I need an ambassadorship now. I've worked for it. I've earned it. It's overdue. Some people might say, oh, just wait, do a good job. They'll recognize you. Women and minorities do that all the time. Ladies, don't do that. We have to learn from the guys. Guys will advocate for themselves. I was hiring an executive director for Leadership Council for Women in National Security. We had a very specific job description. We got 150 people applying for the job, paid well, was prestigious, good. And I just had to laugh because there, you know, X number of supervisory experience, you know, in this field, we want you to know this, that, and the other. I mean, half the guys hadn't done any of it. You know, women, all the women candidates had at least 8 out of the 10 things we were looking for. The guys maybe had 2, 5 if we were lucky, and still said, I'm ready to do this job. I'm the best thing since sliced bread. Ladies, watch that, do that, because you learn on the job. What you don't know, you have to decide, can you learn? Are you able to get that information? And so put yourself forward for things that you don't have all 10 or 8. You might have 5 or 6. When you're getting 4, you're getting kind of dicey. But if you're a fast study, if you're learning, and all of us tend to be very flexible, we have to be, you can learn it. So, yeah. So be flexible in that and make sure you can make your pitch. And that's what I did for that ambassadorship. And that's how I got that. Now that's been an hour of telling you my life. I want to open it up for questions and answers and where you'd like to go. And remember, foreign commercial service, foreign agricultural service, AID, think tanks, internships, and you all are in a great position now because internships are almost all virtual. So you guys could be working for a Washington think tank as well as anybody who's going to Georgetown or American or GW. There's no reason not to. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I could see faces lighting up as you're telling your stories. Amazing. Okay, I just want to ask you to repeat those departments that you mentioned. So foreign commercial, agriculture, USAID.
Yeah, the former foreign commercial service that's run out of the Department of Commerce.
Okay.
The foreign agricultural service, which is run out of the Department of Agriculture. The Agency for International Development, which is its own agency. And then State Department. And in the Department of State, there are 2, in the Foreign Service, there are political officers, economic officers, public diplomacy officers who working with the press, who work on cultural presentations, that sort of thing. That's what public diplomacy officers do. Polling, international libraries they run. There's consular officers who do the visa work, the non-immigrant visas, the immigrant visas, the American Citizen Services. Those are the 3 key things. And you've got, in that section, you've got the most employees because that's where most of the work is, in all honesty. And the management officer. And those are the ones who run the embassies. So if your expertise, if you have an interest in personnel issues or, you know, running a motor pool, management issues, how to get things on time, you know, a power outage, everything's blown. You got to get computers into everybody because the work still has to go. The telephone system, there's a hurricane, you got to get the embassy back up. Those kind of management challenges, if that's what floats your boat, you can do that overseas as well. You're the ones that'll be negotiating the leases for embassies, for that diplomatic housing that we have all over the world. You might oversee the building of an embassy. And those are the people, frankly, that go into great jobs when they come back to the States, because that's so transferable. Many have opened up real estate businesses or, lease negotiations because they've got international experience. So those are the 5 generalists. And in those 5 positions, you are expected, you can be a political officer as your specialty, but you're expected to be able to do economic work or public diplomacy work or even management work. You're a generalist. So there are courses at the Foreign Service Institute that will get you ready to do those jobs, even if your specialty is something else. Then we have what we call specialists. So if you're a law enforcement type, we have our diplomatic security. Those are the ones that secure the embassies, run the local guard force overseas, do investigatory work. They're the ones that do the protection for the Secretary of State, for foreign diplomats. That's not the Secret Service doing that. That's diplomatic security. So if you see a head of state coming in, or the foreign minister speaking at the UN, diplomatic security has gone to New York and set up and done all of that work. You can come in as a doctor, a nurse, a therapist. We have psychiatrists that are posted in Cairo, posted in Nairobi, and do regional work. The medical professionals, we often have nurses at every embassy, but the doctors are at the larger embassies or in regional work. You can be a diplomatic courier if you just want to see the world. And that's carrying the top secret information. It's got to go with a human hand. Eyes have to be on it, from picking it up from the embassy to delivering it to a different embassy. Then you're getting on planes, flying business class or first class all around the world with this special mail. And then you get off, you sleep, you do some sightseeing and do another trip. Some people love that life. I don't like to fly that much, but some people love it. Anyway, there are 19 different specialties. Then there is the civil service at the Department of State, and that's our long-term memory. So if you want to specialize in combating climate change, that's your thing. That's what floats your boat. You can touch it as an economic officer or as a science and technology officer, which is a particular type of economic officer. But if you want to specialize in it, you're likely to be a civil servant working in the bureau in Washington, and you'll work on climate change agreements. You might have scientists, you might do the negotiating part of it. You then will be doing trips for 2 weeks, 2 days, 2 months as you're doing negotiations or leading a negotiating team or going to a conference or giving a speech. So you're based in Washington, but you'll step out 2 days to 2 months at a time. And those you can do human rights, as I said, climate change, law enforcement, border security. We call our Bureau of Drugs and Thugs. International Anti-Narcotics and Law Enforcement is the name of that bureau. Economic and business affairs, our functional bureaus, counterterrorism, the nuclear proliferation. We have different bureaus that very functional issues, and those are the experts in those positions. And then of course we have our intel side. The Department of State has an intel bureau as well, and there are many of those around Washington. Almost every agency has one. They're usually small ones. The big ones, of course, are the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Counterterrorism Center, NCTC, are probably were the 3 big ones. But Treasury's got, State's got. And that's the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And they count as intel. So they've got the highest level of clearance and badges that'll get them into the CIA. Whereas even though I was a US ambassador with the highest clearance, they wouldn't just let me in CIA. I had to wait and be escorted because I wasn't an intel person. You might go over to the NSA if that interests you, or Cyber Command, as I did, because I was interested in that. So all of these different niches, that's why I say, if you're interested in art or design, we have our Bureau of IDF. And of course, having done the Middle East, I think of Israeli Defense Forces. Nope, It stands for Interior Design and Furnishings. We have these beautiful residences all around the world. Well, somebody's got to furnish them. And so we have designers that pick out the furniture and the wallpaper and collect, pieces. We have an entire art gallery in the basement of the State Department because as a new ambassador, I got to choose representational art. So I went down to the gallery with somebody and flipped through artwork and said, I'll have this and I'll have that and I'll have that. And I had all this artwork and they shipped it out to my home and they put it up on my walls and it was there for the 4 years that I was there. And so that's why I say, just find something that you love. If you also want to add that international experience, you can do it.
That's great. And so let's imagine that a student is listening to these stories and they're starting to, get a sense of what diplomatic life might look like and all of the different forms it could possibly take. What would if they want more information and they want to apply, is there a specific site where they go? What's their first step?
Okay. So what I would tell you is go to www.state.gov. And that is the State Department's website. And there you can read in greater detail about all the things I've just told you about the generalist and the 5 specialties and what you do in that specialty. And if you were a specialist instead of a generalist, all of those. It'll talk about internships at the State Department because we do them. Summer and fall and spring internships. I have to tell you, you have to apply the preceding season because you have to get a security clearance. And it's a long time, especially if you've had overseas travel. But do that. The internships are very, very useful to do. Some of the internships, and we're trying to get all of them paid. Some of them are paid, some of them are not. But we're trying to get all of them paid because we don't want anyone not to be able to work there because of money. And we all understand people have to make money as well. On that site, you can also find a practice test, which will give you a sense of, can you pass the test on the first go? Do you have the information, the background to pass the Foreign Service test? So it'll give you a practice test. It'll give you details about it. It's offered 4 times a year. I'm always yelling at students. So if we stay in contact after this, I'm going to yell at you because it's free. All it's going to do is take some of your time, sign up for it and take it. It's not held against you to have taken it more than once. I had to take it twice, so I admit that. I did not pass it the first time. But the best preparation for passing the test is taking the test because it gives you a sense of what's expected. What are the questions like? You'll get a sense of where you need to shore up or do a little bit of studying on. Most people fail it because of the English language grammar. As I said, your communication skills must be top-notch. You need to be able to write tight, clear, grammatically correct sentences. So that's where most people fail. So I tell people, get that book, Eat, Shoots, and Leaves, or another good grammar book and bone up on the grammar because that's where most people fail. It's a 3-pronged test. First is a written test where you also do some essays where you can talk about your background, your leadership experience, your management experience. Did you lead any clubs? Did you participate in any charity drives? I mean, wherever it is, they'll give you the form so you can fill it in with your own experiences. And if you get through both the written test and the essays, then you're invited to an oral test, which is all day long. It's exhausting and so much fun. So much fun. Because listen, for an entire day, people just want to know about you. And everybody loves to talk about themselves. And we give you hypothetical situations, and some of them are really funny. I have to tell you, I did it for a year. I was an examiner. And there were times when I had to just put my head down because the examples were very funny. And I was trying, but they happen to people. They happen, which is why we're giving them to you as part of the test because it really happened. You are going off with an AID colleague because you're responsible for a certain section of a country. It's your first trip. You go out, you visit the village and the town, and you see what they're working on and what the AID program is about. And it's all good. And you come in on this little puddle hopper plane. Because I had to share my seat with a pig once when I was flying in Irian Jaya. It was a 6-seater plane, and pigs were currency there. It was far more valuable than I was. And me and the pig were in that plane going to a different part of Irian Jaya. But as you're leaving the village, they've been so happy to see you and that you visited them, that they've slaughtered a sheep and they are presenting you as freshly slaughtered, bloody lamb to take back in honor of your visit. What do you do? You might come across that question on the exam, and I can assure you a diplomat came across that situation in real life. And what we're hoping that you're going to tell us is, you can't take the bloody lamb back. Okay, we all know that. You cannot. Also, the village is very poor, and that lamb might mean 6 months of meat for them. How do you say no without giving offense? How do you say no without giving offense? And so that's a hypothetical situation where we're going to be looking for you to think about what are the tools. You know, we prefer you not have to lie. Sometimes they're, necessary shadings of the truth. Or, you might be a vegetarian and you're sitting down to a meal and there's a slaughtered lamb sitting in front of you. How are you not going to give offense? Because that meat is an honor and it's rare for people around the world. How do you not break your vegetarian vows without giving offense? And so that's a question.
That's great. Thank you. We're starting to get some questions in the chat room. And for those of you who'd like to ask a question, please do so in the chat box and I will read them. So the first that we have is, could you tell us about your experience in learning Arabic and how it helped you by shaping your future as a diplomat? And then there's a second part, which is, could you mention your favorite Arabic authors, since diplomacy and literature are not so far from one another?
True. They cannot be far from each other. Arabic, I started as a Peace Corps volunteer. I went into Peace Corps with Hebrew as my second language because I'd studied at Tel Aviv University, and Hebrew was offered at my high school here in Cleveland, so I had it. But Johns Hopkins didn't offer it, and if I took it someplace else, it was going to cost me more than my tuition. So I got really interested in Arabic. The foundation was given to me in Peace Corps. I continued it with my graduate degree and just used it. And with any language, the key is to have no embarrassment about your mistakes. And it's true, the joke is, professor, everybody but the French will appreciate your effort even if you make mistakes. The French will sneer at you if you make mistakes. That's the joke. And even at the Foreign Service Institute, when we were getting tested, the joke was that all the French students had at least one glass of white wine before the test because it made the language flow more easily for them. So that was the joke. You'd see, one group with a bottle of wine at lunchtime. You say, "Oh, it's the French students are about to test." I don't know if it helped them, but that was the the tale about them. So my Arabic has been really fluent at certain times. When I was a Peace Corps volunteer, it was very, very good because I looked Omani. They used to rule Tanzania. They were a seafaring nation and ruled Tanzania. So they had a lot of intermarriage. So many Omanis look just this brown and have hair, this texture. And unfortunately, or fortunately, so my Arabic got good because unlike my European American colleagues, they assume I spoke Arabic and they would use Arabic with me even if they spoke English, whereas my European American colleagues, they assumed they didn't speak Arabic and they would have to fight in order to make people use their Arabic with them. But I also, because Oman was a very conservative country, because I was walking around in Western attire in the capital because it was allowed, nothing showy by any means, high collar, below my elbows, below my knees, but not veiled, no burqa. And so people were often coming up to me and saying, "Bikam," which is Arabic for how much, because they thought I was a prostitute, because that's who would be walking around looking like me. So I learned to say in Arabic in many ways, sometimes more polite than others. Basically, you can't afford me, move along. Literature, I would say Naguib Mahfouz. If you have read any of his books, Palace Walk is his most famous one. I think he got a Pulitzer for that. You might have got it up here. Palace Walk and, God, I can't think of the name of it, but it's about the dad, Abu something or other. Can't remember the name of it. Now I'm going to find it. Were really incredibly vibrant slices of Cairo life, Egyptian life. And living there at the time, I read them while there, and I could feel the magic, you know, as I walked the street, because the places that he was writing about, the bazaars, the markets that were in the book were outside my front door, which added an extra richness of reading the literature. So, Naguib Mahfouz.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's lovely to hear you, because you've done so much field work all over the world, talk about the role of literature in, you know, helping sort of synthesize that too. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it adds extra insight. And frankly, I mean, I'm a lazy one of the people I hang out with, because, you know, I have good Arabic when I'm using it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Foreign Service Institute got my Arabic up enough to read the newspaper, Batalaka, with ease, and editorials. That was the standard that was necessary to go out to post. But it would have taken more work on my part to read comfortably in the vernacular, which I have lost, I'm sorry to say. So I have to read translated books, but I have many colleagues who read in the vernacular, who are so learned in that aspect of it. And if you have that interest, in addition to making your life richer, it allows an additional avenue for making a connection with your host nation interlocutors, to be able to discuss authors, you know. And even though, you know, I read it in English, it was a great translation, I know. And he's a popular writer, Naguib Mahfouz. So it'll add to your ability to make good connections with people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.